Welcome to Around the Empire, the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
And I'm your host, Joanne Leon. And today we speak with Middle East commentator, Sonia Mansour Robaey.
Sonia is a neuroscientist, philosopher, ethicist, educator, and she is a Lebanese francophone living abroad. Today we speak with her about the situation in Lebanon. Here is that interview.
Today we're talking with Sonia Mansour Robaey. Sonia was born and raised in Lebanon, and today she's going to help us understand Lebanon itself, the current crisis, and offer us some insight on all of that. Welcome to Around the Empire, Sonia. We're so happy to have you, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, Sonia.
Hello.
Okay. I think when we talked about how we wanted to format this, we decided that I personally think, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think there are a lot of people like this. We don't understand Lebanon as a country very well. And I think that everyone could benefit, certainly our audience, I know certainly I could, from, a bit of history. We don't have to go into great detail, but if you can just help us understand how things got to the point that they are right now in Lebanon, and then we can get into the current crisis, and we can take it from there. But if we could spend a little bit of time on some background, if you'd be willing to do that, that would be really great.
Yes, absolutely. I think, most of the news are consumed today without really digging into the background of these countries. And the background in Lebanon is very heavy, is extremely complex. So I'm not going to delve in detail into the background. I'm not a historian, although I read, a lot about the history of Lebanon. But I think what is always overlooked in political analysis on Lebanon is this background. So let me tell you two things that are really characteristic of this background. There has always been power sharing in Lebanon. And this power sharing existed even under the Ottomans. The first power sharing agreement was between Maronites, which are Lebanese Christians, and Druze, and it was in the 1860s under Ottoman rule, and it was guaranteed by European powers. Mm-hmm. So this is the first thing to understand, and it's been like this ever since. The second thing to understand is that Lebanon is a mosaic of confessional groups. I think there are like maybe 18 sects, religious sects in Lebanon, but the main ones are Christians, Maronites, Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholics, also Christian Armenians. You have also the Sunni. And you have the Shia, the Muslim Sunni and the Muslim Shia. And you have the Druze, which is one of the main, although not very important in numbers, in demographics, but they are very important also, in the history of Lebanon. So the second thing to understand is that this mosaic, any group at any time is always preoccupied. Any religious group at any time is always preoccupied by its survival, and as a group, as a religious group. And this concern has been ongoing, and it varies from one community, one religious group to another, depending on the different pressures that were exerted on the different communities following regional upheavals, wars, external patronage changes in external patronage, and also demographic changes. Like we in Lebanon, we didn't have a census since 1932 because of these two main features of Lebanese politics, the power sharing and the preoccupation of different communities with their survival and also their place within the structure of power. So since 1932, we don't know what is exactly, well, we have some ideas, but there is no study that has been published about the percentage of the different communities within the country. So historically, Lebanon was Mount Lebanon under the Ottoman. There were three communities living in the mountains. So they were mainly mountains. The Christians, Maronites, but also other Christians, the Druze, and the Shia. The Sunni became a sizable community only after the French created the Greater Lebanon in 1920 from the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. They added to Mount Lebanon the main cities. They added Beirut, Tripoli in the north, Tyre, Saida, Baalbek, and the Bekaa also was part of Syria. This is why today you find that Sunni live mostly in urban and coastal areas. The mountain is shared by Maronites, Druze, and Christian and other Christians, and also some villages interspersed in the Christian mountain, some Shia villages. Because Shia, little is known about the history of Shia in Lebanon, but Shia were actually a very important community under the Ottomans. They were tax collectors. They were serving the Ottoman Empire, and they had very ambiguous relationship with the Sublime Porte in Istanbul, because the Ottomans considered them as heretics. But at the same time, they needed them to rule this. The Lebanese mountain was a place difficult to rule for the Ottomans. So they relied at different times on different communities. So the peak of the Shia power under Ottoman rule was in the 16th and the 17th century, but then they were taken over by the Maronites and the Druze. And there is a very interesting book which is called The Shiite of Lebanon under Ottoman Rule from 1516 to 1788, written by Stefan Winter, who teaches at the University of Quebec at Montreal. It's a fascinating book, and I won't go into these details. Maybe I'll read you one sentence or two at the end of this book. What I would like to do before moving to present day is to tell you the history of the main power sharing agreements.
Great.
If you agree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so I told you there was a power sharing agreement under the Ottoman, but then the French created power sharing agreement when they created the Greater Lebanon, and it took them 6 years to find a correct balance. And it was in 1926 they created actually the current constitution of Lebanon, which was amended many times over.
So not too long after the Sykes-Picot, they came up with this constitution, and
exactly.
It has held up pretty well over the century.
Absolutely. It has held up with different amendments, of course, to the point where when Lebanon, unilaterally declared its independence from the French it's called the National Pact. They called in 1943. So Lebanon unilaterally declared its independence by writing off any reference to the French mandate from the French Constitution. So they kept the Constitution, and they just wrote off any reference to the French mandate, and they have at the same time they have some unwritten agreement, which was put in word but not on the paper. So this is the National Pact after the 1926 Constitution of the French. There was the National Pact of 1943, and it was mainly a pact between Christians and Sunni.
Independence Day that they just celebrated when Hariri came back, is that independence from the French?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And so, after the National Pact in 1943, we had some relative stability until 1958. Actually, the last French troop left Lebanon a few years later in 1946. And then we had some stability until 1958, when there was like a mini civil war in 1958. This was the year, my year of birth, actually. There was a little civil war because the Christian president, one thing I forgot to tell you is that we think that the unwritten pact of 1943 stipulated that the president will be Christian, the president of the House of Deputies will be Shia, and the prime minister will be Sunni. It is nowhere written in the Constitution. What the French insisted on in the 1926 Constitution was that the power must be shared by different religious groups, and there should be religious freedom. And this was something that the 1926 Constitution made really clear. So you have this unwritten national pact, and we always had our president Christian, coming from the Christian Maronite community, our prime minister Sunni, and the president of the House of the Deputy Shia. So in 1958, the Christian president who was Camille Chamoun at that time. One thing I forgot to mention is that what the French created is a house divided. So what the French created, a Greater Lebanon, is a house divided, because the Sunni who joined Lebanon and the Greater Lebanon had a pan-Arab identity, while the Christian who were dominant in Mount Lebanon, I think when the French mandate started on Lebanon, the Christians were above 50%. This percentage has dwindled now because of immigration. So when Sunni joined, we had a house divided because the Christians always looked to the West and the Sunni always looked to their Arab identity. Mm-hmm. So in 1958, these two tendencies will come to clash because the Christian president wanted to join a defense pact that was initiated actually by the United States between the U.S., Turkey, Pakistan, Baghdad. Actually, it was called the Baghdad Pact. And the president of Lebanon wanted to join this pact, and Sunni didn't want to join this pact. And we were near a civil war, and this was the year actually when the U.S. sent troops to Lebanon. And it is judged by some historians that as it was an overreaction, really. So finally, we didn't join the pact. And anyway, the changes that happened in the Arab world, mainly in Iraq, at this point, the end of the monarchy, ended this pact effectively. So this pan-Arab identity was mainly held by Sunni. 1958, 1961, there will be a little coup from a small party that exists today against the president, but then it was it ended with no problems. So you have to think of Lebanon as, since its creation, having like seismic political activity from time to time, and only small periods of relative stability. Right. And what will really change the country and lead it to the path of the civil war very, very slowly is the Palestinian question. A lot of Palestinians took refuge in Lebanon, and in 1969 there was what we call the Cairo Agreement, which brokered by Egypt's Nasser, which allowed Palestinians to have their weapons inside the refugee camps. And Yasser Arafat was the head of the PLO at the time. So all this was tearing the country apart, because the more, this pan-Arab identity at that time was developing with sympathy for Palestinians and the struggle against Israel. At the same time, Christians were retreating and looking to the West. And this is where it will come to clash in the first real civil war that lasted approximately 15 years, and that will start in 1975. Because the Christians didn't want anything to do with, the Christian leader, of course. I'm not talking about the people. This is where the power sharing agreement really was ended, and it happened because of it was impossible to reconciliate these two opposing tendencies at the time with all what was happening. So this is the background. Now there were two other power sharing agreements. The most important one was at the end of the Civil War, and it's called the Ta'if Agreement. I don't know if you've heard about it.
Is this now we're in the 1980s now?
Yes, 1989.
Okay.
Ta'if Agreement was brokered by Saudi Arabia to end the civil war in Lebanon. And this is where the Hariri family actually will come to prominence.
Okay, his father, right?
Yeah, because his father was in Saudi Arabia, and actually it is rumored that Hariri, paid from his own money to buy compromises and concessions and to bring about the agreement. But what is important about Ta'if is that Ta'if transferred a part of the executive power from the Christian president to the Sunni PM.
Without changing the constitution?
Well, it was amended. Actually,
okay.
It was amended. Yeah, it was voted by the chamber. It was amended.
So it was official. Okay.
It was official. Yeah. And after this, you will have another agreement that will come after the 2006 war, because Israeli war on Lebanon, because what happens in the 2006 war is that you have Hezbollah who came to prominence. They defeated the Israelis in 2000. They defeated Israel in 2006. Nobody in his own mind can consider that Israel won its war against Hezbollah in 2006. So it was considered as a victory for Hezbollah. And then after 2006, we didn't change the power sharing in the chamber. So what happened is there was a small crisis. And Hezbollah was some people in the government and outside the government, some political leaders accused Hezbollah of having, controlling Beirut airport, having his own network of communication, of telecommunication, and they wanted to end this. And this is when Hezbollah, I think it was overreaction. If you compare to their reaction now, vis-a-vis what happened to Hariri in Saudi. At the time, they literally, in a matter of days and without shedding of hours, without shedding blood, they occupied Beirut because they were threatened by some people to end their telecommunication network on which they rely in their warfare against Israel. Another thing that happened is that Hariri will be killed assassinated in 2005. And this usually was supposed to precipitate the country in a big crisis, and it didn't. Actually, it was a moment of unity among many people in the country. They came together, and it allowed the international community to ask the Syrian army to leave Lebanon, because Syria actually was, during the whole Lebanese war, was acting as a buffer army between the different communities, making sure no one will win. And when the war ended and Ta'if was brokered, it was brokered also with the agreement of the Syrian, and it will lead from the 1990s to 2005 to a period of reconstruction and relative stability, because Saudi and Syria, actually, they teamed up to end the civil war in Lebanon. But I think something that is, in my opinion, overlooked is that if you look at Saudi role and Saudi interventions in Lebanon, they always happened through a more proximal country, because we're not from the same geopolitical area as the Saudi. We are the Levant, and they are in the Gulf area. So they always happen through Syria. or through Egypt. So Saudi relied a lot on, not during Nasser rule, of course, because they didn't agree with Nasser, but very much through Syria and through Egypt under Mubarak. This is, what I wanted to say is that with Hariri, they had their own man in Lebanon.
Right.
And so they, after a while, they didn't feel the need to have to broker anything with the help of the Syrians or anyone. And Hariri was really, gaining prominence at the international stage, and actually, he was very active in sponsoring a resolution, which is 1559, which will call for all foreign troops to leave Lebanon. And it was voted by the UN Security Council in 2004.
So the Hariris have always been proxies of sorts for the Saudis.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. And they are not part of the feudal system, because what you have in Lebanon, atop the confessional system, you have a feudal system. And the feudal system is like each religion, each sect has a prominent family that is very much one family or two that are very much involved into politics. And, it's the rule of the families. And what the civil war changed is, the coming of Hariri into the political scene, but also Aoun is not part, our current president is not part of this feudal system, neither Nasrallah, Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a lot of change in a relatively short period of time and really a young nation.
Yeah, exactly.
Figure out if we were going to move on to the current Hariri hostage crisis, not hostage crisis. What exactly is going on right now?
Yeah. I think it's a perfect time to pivot to the current crisis, if that's okay with you, Sonia.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hariri, this is the second time he's PM. Well, actually, for a long time, he was not in Lebanon. And before he became PM, there was, if my memory is correct, in 2011, after a period of, a crisis, we had a government in which his political formation did not participate, and this was the Mikati government. So now with Hariri finally, it surprised everyone when he accepted, to come back to Lebanon and to act as a PM in a government in which you have Hezbollah. So what was going on? I think there was a lot of change for the Hariri family with the change in the Saudi leadership. Because they were very, very close to King Fahd, and then after there was King Abdullah and now King Salman.
Right.
Yeah. And so they were, if I understand well, Hariri was not close to the new royal family. And so this is something that might have prompted him, to come and to participate in a government in which Hezbollah is present. And the other thing is that the financial fortunes of the Hariri family were declining also at the same time. They have been declining for quite a while with problems. He had to pay his workers, actually. Not many people know that many French in Saudi Arabia worked for Saudi Oger, which is the Hariri company, and there was a long time during which they were not paid, so France had to intervene, and there was a side settlement for the French workers, but not all workers, if I understand, were compensated. So, but at the same time, this family has a lot of stake in Saudi Arabia. They have the Saudi citizenship. They have their business is completely dependent on Saudi, on Saudis. So I think the decline, because now Saad Hariri is considered by many in Lebanon as a hero, because he was, they think, even in his own community, in his own political camp, they think he was actually detained by the Saudi. He wasn't a free man. So there is a kind of, compassion for the man, and people are uniting around him. But he wasn't really very popular before this event.
That's pretty interesting, the way
and I don't know if this is going to last either. So what's happening now? He's back in Lebanon. Now he said he presented his resignation to the president. He said that the president asked him to postpone, pending some consultations with the government, and that's what he did. So his family is still in Saudi Arabia. His wife returned back from France to Saudi Arabia, and if I understand, he has 2 children there.
Yeah, I heard his 2 youngest children are still in school.
Yes,
in Saudi Arabia, and that's supposedly why they stayed.
Yes, I think the Saudi royal family are also known to blackmail people with their own family members.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've heard about the daughters of King Fahd who were detained. They were on Twitter maybe 2 years ago, and then it died down. One of the wives of King Fahd was in London, and she cannot see her daughter because she was sure if she went back to Saudi Arabia, she was going to be detained like her daughters, and she could not. She was asking for the king to release her daughters, and he would not do it. And the daughters themselves, they said that they were detained. They expressed themselves in the clearest way possible. So and also the other bind for Hariri is the financial bind. This is the most important one. He owes the Saudi a lot of money. They owe him money too. They didn't pay some of his contracts. So this is the worst possible situation for him, and I don't know how he's going to get his things sorted out.
But Sonia, here's a question. What was the point of kidnapping him and getting, this is aimed at Hezbollah, right? And can you go into a little bit of background of Hezbollah and why, I guess, Saudi see them as proxies for Iran and Hariri's relationship with Hezbollah? Because I guess they were supposed to be allied with Syria, right? And Syria allegedly assassinated his father. So you can go into that background a little bit, because I think that's the missing piece. Why would the Saudis kidnap or threaten, intimidate? What was the point?
Yeah, I think, I could go into the background with Hariri's father and Hezbollah. But I think in Hariri's detention, I think the Saudi intended to create a constitutional crisis. Because remember, the Ta'if agreement transferred most of the executive power from the Christian president to the Sunni PM. So without the PM in the country, or with the PM resigning, Lebanon was going to have on its hand a constitutional crisis and a political crisis. And it was like a message from the Saudi to the president, what are you going to do now? We're taking your prime minister. We're taking most of your executive power. We're taking power from you. This is, basically it was this move. And I think, because they could influence him, but the fact that they detained him physically, it was intended to provoke a constitutional crisis, because he was away from the country, and the constitution, the protocol stipulates that he should tend his resignation physically to the president, not read some message on TV.
Oh, so it's to destabilize. So the Saudis are trying, or tried at least, to destabilize the entire country.
Yes.
Why do they want to do that?
Because they lost in Yemen, they lost in Syria, they are losing everywhere, and they are trying to, I would say, to work anything that is in their hand, that is in their power, to make things worse for Hezbollah. I think Nasrallah said in his, I think he gave immediately in the week following Hariri's alleged resignation 2 speeches. There was another one recently. And Nasrallah said, there were some disagreements with Hariri, but at the same time, this government has achieved some substantial things. And so Hariri was in the government, was going along, and this infuriated the Saudis. But I don't think it was just a tantrum. I think it's easy to say it's a tantrum. I think it was just to provoke crisis and to see if they can do something with this crisis. And the surprising thing is that, and they should have anticipated it, they weren't able to do anything. Everybody was calm. Lebanese and Lebanon's political leaders united to offer a very calm response. And I think it was the advisor to President Aoun who said that he mentioned that they received a letter of threats from the Saudi. He didn't say the Saudi. He said, we received a letter threatening us. And the fact that we answered that if you're threatening a part of Lebanon, you are threatening all Lebanon. So Lebanon, faced this united. They didn't say like, oh, okay, you have a problem with Hezbollah, you go after Hezbollah, and we'll try to go our own way. No, they said any attack on any part of Lebanon or on the government of Lebanon is an attack on all Lebanon. And the fact, and the advisor to President Aoun, Jean Aziz, said, the fact that we offered a united response defeated the purpose of those who wanted to provoke a crisis.
Destabilize
the country.
Is it fair to say that the Saudis hoped, well, let's put it this way, what they couldn't achieve on the battlefield militarily, they hoped to do by destabilizing the country. In other words, to take power away from Hezbollah. And they, since they couldn't do it in Syria on the battlefield, or I guess in other battles, this was just another attempt to reduce their influence in Lebanon. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I totally agree with this assessment. And they were trying. What do they have? The question: what do they have? They have Hariri, and Hariri is someone valuable. He has interest in Saudi Arabia. He's the PM of Lebanon. He has dual citizenship. So let's use Hariri. But in doing so, it's a foolish thing they've done, because they united Lebanese, and also at the same time they disenfranchised their own the Sunni community in Lebanon. What are Sunni now who consider Hariri as their leader? What are they going to think? Because inside the Hariri camp, there was an admission that he wasn't a free man in Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the interesting part. I was reading Robert Fisk. I'm not sure. I think he's lived in Lebanon for quite a while. I'm not sure, how good his take is on it, but he was basically saying that the Saudis were using Hariri to try to, his job was to reduce the amount of power that Hezbollah had inside the country. And that, he had failed, essentially. And so that's why they hauled him back. That's
because he has failed in Lebanon to reduce Hezbollah's power?
Yeah, that's what Fisk.
Maybe Fisk is right, but this is unrealistic. I mean, this is not realistic. How do you want to reduce Hezbollah power? How could Hariri, on his own, reduce Hezbollah power if the Saudi can't? It's really not realistic to say this. It's like shifting the blame on someone else. Of course, Hariri is not. He has been known as a very not a good leader. Okay, but suppose he was like super smart and maneuvering and really good at politics. He couldn't do anything. I mean, the reality is you have Hezbollah as a power now in Lebanon, and they have won 2 wars against Israel. They have contributed winning the military war in Syria. It's not finished, but it's almost finished. They are powerful. And what can you ask Hariri as a Lebanese to do against Hezbollah. I mean, they tried. There was someone else during the 2006 Israeli war on Lebanon. There was the government was headed by PM Sanyura, who is also Saudi's man. So if you read, we had some access to the WikiLeaks cable from this period, and you can see clearly that Sanyura was maneuvering, trying to, during the 2006 war, trying to not make things look good for Hezbollah, to prolong the war of Israel against Hezbollah. But even though, and this was the 2006, during the Bush second presidency, the summum of neoconservative power in the area. And they were really, they could really do mayhem. And they could not defeat Hezbollah. Actually, I was reading one of the Israeli scholars, I was reading him the last day on the 2006 war. He calls the 2006 war against Hezbollah the first Israel-Iran war. Because, what is targeted beyond Hezbollah is Iran. And they're trying, you have this, what we call the axis of resistance. You have Syria, you have Hezbollah and Lebanon. Lebanon now is all part of the axis of resistance because it is considered as such, not in 2006, but now, because Hezbollah is in the government, it is considered as such by its enemies and allies alike. And you have Iran, and they are trying, sometimes in Syria, sometimes in Lebanon. They can't approach Iran because Iran is a big, big thing to do. They tried to change regime in Iran and they did not succeed. So they still try. And to put the blame on Hariri is really that Hariri wasn't able to do anything against Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a military power. What is he going to do? He can't do anything against Hezbollah.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And pulling him back still doesn't make much sense to me either.
No, these are desperate measures, really.
Right.
Well, it seems like the Saudis gambled in Syria, and it looks like it went bad for them there, and they're sort of lashing out. I think like sort of the bombing in Yemen looks a lot like misdirected rage and not being able to take out Assad. Now they're lashing out at Lebanon. But if anything, it seems these interventions they've been pushing the last few years have actually strengthened the very people they're trying to weaken, which is something people talked about the Iraq War. Donald Trump, now President Trump, amazingly, said during the campaign, Iran is the real winner of the Iraq War. And he said a lot of things in the campaign that made no sense, but I always thought that was a pretty poignant point to make, and that these continued interventions, which a lot of which is at Saudi's behest, and we know now that the Saudis were funding ISIS and that they were funding the al-Nusra Front. The al-Qaeda affiliate may still be funding al-Nusra for all we know. These were all meant to overthrow Assad and destabilize Lebanon, and it seems the opposite has happened each time. So it seems like the Saudis are kind of the gang that can't shoot straight all of a sudden, and they're lashing out and doing things even more ill-advised to the point that it may have brought down the previous government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is a deterioration in the Saudi leadership. I think it's becoming weaker and weaker. It's weakening, definitely. I think all these events have strengthened Iran. Iran didn't have to do a lot of things, to become regional power. And also, if you look at the size of Iran and Saudi, I mean, Iran is the biggest country. Historically, it's a country that thinks of itself in terms of thousands and thousands of years. While the Saudi are relatively a new country, always dependent on external powers. And they have strengthened the hand of Iran. And so the other thing I think is happening too is that, there is, who is using whom here? Okay, the Saudis are furious. Iran is becoming a regional power, but at the same time, the U.S. Is not coming to terms with the Islamic Revolution in Iran and want to change things there. And Israel too. Israel is still considers Iran. Israel now has carved out a narrative that Arabs are our friends, just because the Gulf monarchies are dealing with them, on friendly terms. And now there is this kind of Arabism promoted by Saudi that is not the pan-Arabism I was talking about earlier, that was pro-Palestine, very much pro-resistance. Now the Arabism that is being promoted by Saudi is more against Iran. But so there is like kind of triangulation. You have Saudi are unhappy with Iran, the US is unhappy with Iran, Israel is unhappy with Iran. They can't go to war with Iran. This is a big, big thing because they have been thinking about it for a long time. And I think I realized this when I read from this Israeli scholar, and also he was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin, I think, who said the 2006 Israeli war on Lebanon was actually the first Israel-Iran war. I was surprised. I said, well, he's right. He is completely right. And Syria, they hope that in Syria they would weaken Iran, and every time they are doing something, they're not weakening Iran, they are strengthening Iran. So there is a kind of miscalculation here.
Yeah, and more importantly, Saudi Arabia itself, which has always relied, it doesn't have much of a military, despite spending tremendous amounts of money buying U.S. military equipment. It has a pretty poor army. It wasn't even able to do much in the first Gulf War in 91. It hasn't been able to do much now. Even the bombing in Yemen that are essentially war crimes at this point isn't possible without mid-flight refueling and U.S. targeting. I don't know how good the targeting is because they keep hitting all these civilians. But the Saudis are in their own crisis because oil is dropping. And that really is the source of their power. They are, to paraphrase John McCain on Russia, they are a gas station kind of posing as a country. They don't have much. I mean, there's nothing really binding it together except the fact that there's this sort of royal family of thousands of people who are all getting a piece of the action. And if I look at the sort of consolidation of power with the Salman clan or whoever is coming, it looks to me a lot like they're just clawing back money that they didn't want to give out, arresting all these rich people, including the Western playboy, bin Talal. They're just taking this money. It's basically kind of like a robbery to keep the coffers going. And a lot of the reason they're having to do that is the price of oil is dropping, and a lot of their money has been sent buying U.S. military equipment, which is kind of the price for protection. It kind of looks like there's a tribute system where we'll protect you, and in exchange you buy all this military equipment you can't use. So I wonder if I was betting on who's going to collapse first, if that's going to happen for either power in this sort of Cold War in the Middle East, I would bet on the Saudis collapsing first because they don't have a real, it's this sort of like deal making. We make a deal with the Wahhabist, Salafist clerics. We make a deal with the United States. We make to sort of stay in power. Whereas Iran has this sort of a much more coherent, it's kind of a real nation. Is that a fair take or?
Yes, absolutely.
Can I add to that question a little bit? Like, this might be my own perception, but it seems to me that with all the destabilization that has been going on for years for different reasons, particularly in the past couple of decades, you have a whole region who, if I were them, my number one priority would be some stability, just some kind of a livable environment. And so it seems to me that might be rising above everything else, and why yanking their prime minister away, didn't destabilize Lebanon.
Why detaining Hariri didn't destabilize Lebanon?
Yeah,
is it question?
I was just adding to Dan's question, to why the Saudis seem to be the weaker party here, and for financial reasons, for all the reasons that Dan laid out so well. But I also wonder if is it also a factor that you have millions of people who have been living in a destabilized region for so long that become the top priority becomes to be able to live a normal life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why Lebanon has been stable during the Syria civil war. Many people have made compromises to keep the country stable because we have undergone our own civil war, and it wasn't pretty. I lived 6 years in Lebanon during the civil war, and it was a horror. I wouldn't wish this on many. I wouldn't wish a Saudi collapse either. I could not even think what will happen if the kingdom collapses. And I think both the US and Israel are playing really dangerous games in the area because it seems that we have a rise in irrational leaders and irrational policies. And the region doesn't need this. It needs cool heads to prevail. And right now, we don't have these cool heads. I mean, you have islands of stability. Of course, Lebanon has been very good in resisting, the instability, and mainly because we sealed our borders from ISIS and from al-Nusra, and while at the same time creating conditions for dialogue inside the country. So I think, Western powers should be fostering stability. I think they are very keen on the stability in Lebanon. They should be doing it for other countries. I don't know why they are, selling all these weapons to Saudi Arabia, and why they don't step in, because actually the Saudi, I think, they have been close allies with the US. So why don't the United States, ask the Saudi to cool off a little bit, regarding Iran. I think I'm very afraid of the rise of irrational powers in the region, like Mohammed bin Salman. You have Netanyahu, who is really a dangerous man. And what we need is stability. I think we need leaderships at the regional and international levels, working towards stability, because I can't even think what will happen if the Saudi monarchy collapses.
So we're almost up to an hour here. I think, Dan, maybe you have some more you'd like to bring in, and then maybe Sonia can wrap up a little bit.
Well, I think it's a good time to pivot to, now that Hariri is free-ish and is back in Lebanon, even though his family is still in the Saudi control.
Hostage, right?
So it's a hostage. What is now that this ploy or this plan has failed to destabilize Lebanon, do you think the Saudis or the Saudi royal family or the new powers over there are just going to say, okay, it didn't work, we've got to have to work with a Lebanon that has Hezbollah influence at least, or has Hezbollah see the table? Or do you think the Saudis are going to try something else to, I guess, dislodge Hezbollah, however, unrealistic that might be?
Mm-hmm. The answer is here. Do we have a rational Saudi leadership right now? We don't. So the bet is they're going to try something else. They're not going to come to reality. And I'm not very optimistic about this. I think there is a reality in Lebanon, as I explained, the power sharing agreement. You have the rise of Hezbollah, the rise of the Shia, the shedding of the, very little by little of the feudal system of government. And Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese society. It is part of the Lebanese political landscape. You can just decide that you want to erase Hezbollah. That's one point. And this is what Israel tried to do in the 2006 war. The other point is that you have Israel, and Israel is a country without definitive borders. Nothing is resolved. It's been like this for years and years. Settlements are ongoing. And as long as Israel is being let loose, I think we're going to have instability, because it's going to do whatever it is in its power to destabilize the country even more. Because as long as we have terrorists, irrational Saudi leadership, Arabs bickering between themselves, Sunni against Shia. Israel can, nobody is asking Israel to do concessions because we're being busy with something else. So I think we need some rational leaders, to come up with a solution, and it has to be a holistic solution for region. It has to include peace. Israel has to accept peace, and as long as it doesn't, we're going to have destabilizations ongoing.
Well, that was one of the things that came out in the news, or at least rumors, was that the Saudis kind of did make overtures, because there is this increasingly obvious alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel. I mean, to the point where it might even be a little dangerous for the Saudi royal family to be so openly on the side of Israel, given the Palestinian question. But they basically, that there was an overture made for Israel to sort of think about military options in Lebanon, and from all accounts, Israel kind of backed off. I guess little rationality there in terms of what they learned from 2006. So it's not clear that the Saudis can find anyone to do their bidding on this issue, even Israel, which does in theory, have an interest in destabilizing Lebanon as well. They seem not so sanguine to get involved in any more military action for the moment in Lebanon, even at the Saudis' behest. And I'm sure there was money offered or whatever pleas were made behind the scenes. So I don't see Israel. Do you see Israel perhaps jumping back in militarily into Lebanon?
No, as Nasrallah said, Israel does its own calculations. As Saudi, if there is a war with Lebanon, Israel will be more threatened than Saudi, Israeli cities, and I think they do their own calculations. And there is some rationality here, as you said. But the other thing is that I think they have a role in pushing the Saudi leadership to, the other way, to destabilize Lebanon. I don't know, like Netanyahu tweeted a few things about the events in Saudi Arabia, praising the move. It's something like they are inciting this irrational Saudi leadership to escalate. And they're not thinking that at some point it may have a boomerang effect on them, So there is some rationality, but it's not well calculated. And I think Israel should think twice before trying to further destabilize the region or encourage destabilizations. Because it may have some negative effect on them. And they're not thinking about that now. But definitely they're not going to intervene on behalf of Saudi Arabia, because they work in their own interest and they do their own calculations.
Okay.
I guess we should wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time and for all your knowledge and insights. We really appreciate it, Sonia.
No problem. I hope that it was a good contribution that sheds some light on what's going on in Lebanon now.
Thank you so much.
Definitely was.
Thank you. Pleasure to discuss with you.
Have a great day.
Take care
Bye-bye.
now.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
And that's our show. I want to thank you for listening. Follow Sonia at Twitter at Sonia Mrobaey. See her work at La Politique. If you'd like to support the show, we deeply appreciate it. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire. Questions, comments, want to yell at me? Dan at AroundTheEmpire.com. Check out our work at our website, AroundTheEmpire.com. Follow us on Twitter at AroundTheEmpire. Follow Joanne at Joanne Leon, Leon. And follow me at US Empire Show.
Also, please subscribe and follow us on iTunes, YouTube, and Facebook.
Thanks. See you next time.
Take care, everyone.